My name's Charles Threadgill. I go by Chuck. Everyone calls me Chuck. I'm a retired engineer from Southwestern Bell Telephone. I worked for them for almost 30 years. Did some contracting work after that, and now I'm totally retired. I've lived on this property out here in Creek County for 25 years, a quarter of a century. We were looking for a house, and I liked a rural setting. I'd like to have a couple of acres. This had a little more acreage than I wanted, 5 acres, but it was close to downtown Tulsa, close to expressways, close to I-44, and just about everything that I needed. That was one of the reasons that I bought this property, because it had a nice creek that was flowing through it at that time. And this creek, depending on whether we're in a drought or not, that affects the flow of the creek. But most years it flows year-round. Well, what brought my attention to the quality of the water in the creek was that several years ago somebody bought the property next to me and subdivided it into lots. And I noticed that the house that's closest to my property, they had spray heads out there, and it was spraying something over onto my property and into the creek. I was later to find out that that was sewage effluent that it was spraying into the creek and onto my property, and so that concerned me about the quality of the creek. That I knew that couldn't be right, and that had to be against state laws, because it just common sense tells you we don't want sewage effluent getting into the creeks from individual sewage treatment systems. So that made me think that maybe I should have the water tested. Yeah, this is a tributary wet weather creek, and the length of the whole tributary is only about a half mile, and I'm right in the middle of it. So in about a quarter mile from my house, it flows into a larger body of water called Nickel Creek, which is on the, Nickel Creek is on the state's 303D report that they send to the EPA that lists creeks that are impaired or polluted. And of course, Nickel Creek is very polluted, and it's polluted with E. coli. E. coli is a human pathogen. It's a bacteria that is very hazardous to the human. Although E. coli comes from the intestines of all mammals. But E. coli contamination can lead to heart failure, kidney failure, colitis, inflammation, and it actually can kill people. So it's a very dangerous substance to be around, and that's why the state sets guidelines. And the statute that covers this is Title 785, Chapter 45, and it states in there that the E. coli cannot be more than 126 colonies per 100 milliliters. Well, it's always been higher than 126 colonies, and it ranges from up in the hundreds to, it has actually measured as high as 24,190 colonies per 100 milliliters, more than 200 times what's allowed by state law. Sure, I contacted Tulsa Health Department and told them my situation. Even though I live in Creek County, they're willing to test my water for me, water samples. And what the person has to do is go pick up the bottles. They have some sort of a chemical in it to help maintain the water, and they there's a certain line on the bottle that it has to be filled up to. You fill it up to that line with your creek water, and it has to be kept on ice and has to be turned into the lab within 6 hours of when it was taken. And they can get the test results back in about a day or two. My first initial test, when we first started testing this water, they didn't measure for the E. coli, they just measured for fecal coliform, and it was way above the state limits on fecal coliform. Since then, I believe it's 2011, they changed and they started looking at just the E. coli in the creek. So when we found this high level of fecal coliform or E. coli, we contacted Oklahoma Department of Environmental Quality, known as DEQ, and we filed official complaints with them about the high contaminant in the creek water. Sure, we contacted DEQ whenever we realized that our neighbors were spraying their sewage effluent onto my property and into the creek. And we made an official complaint, and DEQ sent out an individual out here to look at their sewage treatment system. And they determined that it was within 10 feet of a wet weather creek. By state law, Title 252, Chapter 641, nothing from an aerobic sewage treatment system can be any closer than 15 feet to the top bank of the creek. Since then, they've had to change that to 25 feet from the top bank of the creek because of consumer complaints that Oklahoma Department of Environmental Quality has received. The investigator from Oklahoma Department of Environmental Quality, also known as DEQ, she came out and determined that the spray heads were 10 feet from a wet weather creek. Subsequent to that, we found out that the installer who self-inspects his own system once he installed it, the paperwork that he turned in showed that it was 42 feet away from what he termed a ditch. So he erroneously submitted documentation to DEQ. Now, they didn't need to notify everyone about the regulation change because if you're grandfathered in underneath the 15-foot rule, then your system did not need to be modified. But for new installations, they had to meet the new 25-foot rule from the top bank of a creek. I feel like the E. coli must be coming from somebody's malfunctioning sewage treatment system. I don't know which one that is, but because of the high E. coli number, that is the suggestion I've got from Tulsa Health Department, that this is more than likely a sewage leak. So we tested this water and it's been high in E. coli. We've tested it upstream also at several locations, and it's high up there. It's from my conversations with Tulsa Health Department, they believe that there's a good possibility this contaminant is caused by somebody's leaking sewage system. And I feel that's a real possibility for the source of the E. coli. Now, this water flows, as I've said, into Nickel Creek, and that flows into Polecat Creek, Polecat Creek is also on the EPA's impaired water list that Oklahoma provides them. It's called a Section 303D report. So all this water has a nexus, meaning that it is really all connected. Even your smallest tributaries are connected. Whenever water flows in them, it certainly gets into the larger creeks, which gets into the larger river, which gets into our lakes. So that's why the Environmental Protection Agency has come up with what's called the Waters of the United States and have expanded those to include wet weather creeks and ephemeral creeks. Well, despite DEQ telling me they have nothing to do with creeks, it is them that actually test these creeks to find out what the impairment is, if there is an impairment, and it is DEQ that supplies the 303D report to Region 6 Environmental Protection Agency to their Clean Water Protection Division. Oh no, I'm sure there's other creeks that flow into Nickel Creek, and I'm not aware of what their pollutant numbers are. But I'm aware that the ones in this tributary is extremely high and has to be a major contributor to the E. coli in Nickel Creek.